Hello everyone, I'm Phil Hampton, founder of thecomicacademy.com, and in this call I'm talking to Garen Ewing. Garen is a writer and artist who's best known for his comic strip adventure The Rainbow Orchid, which is being published as a series of 3 graphic novels. Welcome to the call, Garen.
Hi there, thanks.
Hi. To kick us off, can you please tell us how you got interested in writing and drawing comics?
Well, I've always drawn and written comics, so it's difficult to remember the actual origin.
So you started as a young child?
Yes, yeah. I mean, my young childhood is very fuzzy, but I came out of it wielding a pencil. And I think I was looking back on it. I think the origin is I was in hospital a bit when I was a kid,
right.
And my mum used to keep me entertained by bringing me comics and also blank paper and pens and pencils. So I think I had no choice really. I ended up just drawing comics to entertain myself, which was great.
Okay. So that interest that you got, you then developed that. Did you have any time away from comics, or is that a continual thing throughout your life?
I have been away from it to various degrees. I keep getting into different things, and when I get into something, I tend to get into it sort of 120%.
Right.
So I've had little patches, like I was in a band for a while in my early 20s, and that was probably the biggest patch where I didn't really do any comics.
What kind of band was it?
It was a kind of I suppose it was sort of a folky rock band. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that started to get not professional in any way, but fairly serious. We were doing quite a lot of gigs and stuff. So, and then I realised I didn't really enjoy it, so I left that and got back into comics again.
Yeah. Okay. So what comic-related projects did you work on prior to the Rainbow Orchid?
When I started self-publishing, which was in about 1985, I was 15.
Right.
It wasn't comics I did originally. I was into role-playing games then. And so I started doing a fanzine, and that included comic strips, because despite all these, like when I was in a band, we had a little sort of newsletter, and I'd always do a comic strip for it. So comics were always a part of these things somewhere. So my role-playing game fanzines always had a comic in it, although usually just a page or something.
So was that what was the circulation of that fanzine?
Oh, 50 or something. Very
right.
small.
Okay. So that was to your school friends? Was it?
No, there was the sort of role-playing community, which was mainly through a magazine called White Dwarf, and I'd advertise it in there, and it was all, you get postal orders and send them off in the post.
Right.
That was really the only way I sold those, I think. I think I went to maybe 2 games conventions in about 5 years or something, and had them on a table there, but it was mainly through the post.
But that's quite an early age to start selling your own work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was 15 when I started that. It was a really, really very simple photocopied, stapled together thing. I did it on my mum's photocopier at her work. Just about 20 pages or something.
Right.
And I guess after doing that for about 5 years or so, I started realising that I wasn't really into role-playing games so much anymore, and I started getting back into comics. And actually, this was also about the time I needed to start earning some money to pay rent.
Yes.
And so this was about 1988, and I got onto something called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which was a government scheme where you got £40 a week, I think, for a year, if they accepted your business idea. And mine was to produce a black and white comics anthology, which was called Cosmorama, and so I got accepted on that. And certainly for that year, I got £40 a week to produce this magazine, and it only lasted 3 issues into the early 90s. But I had some very good contributors because I was able to pay them for the first year. So I had some quite early work from Warren Ellis.
Oh, right.
And some other, probably the other most famous artist is David Wyatt, who's not really in comics anymore. He does book covers. Steve Pugh.
Yes, Steve Pugh, yeah. He did The Mask.
Yes. Who else? those are probably the biggest names now.
So these are guys who sent you their work or provided you with their work to put in your magazine?
Yeah, Paul Gravett had a magazine called Escape, which I'm sure you've heard of. And he, I think he phoned me up and I ended up putting an advert. Well, I advertised for artists and writers in all kinds of papers. I think there was one called Speakeasy, and there were quite a lot of comic magazines around then. Because this was about the time of the sort of graphic novel boom at the end of the 80s, when you had Dark Knight Returns and all that. So there was a lot of interest in comics. And I had over 200 submissions.
Wow.
Because I said I could pay. I think that was the difference. And that was really interesting, very educational to see all kinds of portfolios coming my way. And this was before the internet, really, so it was all through the post.
So you had the opportunity to reject Warren Ellis's work.
Yeah, so Warren Ellis was in the 3rd issue, and by then I wasn't paying people, I don't think. I did pay Warren Ellis. He did a 3 or 4 page script, and I think I paid him £15 or something.
Excellent.
You know, it wasn't for much. He was doing work for Harrier Comics.
Yes.
And in fact, Harrier Comics were going to take over the publication of Cosmorama.
Right.
And I can't remember why that didn't work out. I think I lost interest. And Harrier Comics, they went on for a bit longer, but eventually faded as well.
Okay. So did you go on to then print your own work after that?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Cosmorama as well. Obviously self-published my own work in there. After that finished, I did various things for other people, self-published fanzines and small press comics. The next big project I did was an adaptation of The Tempest by Shakespeare.
Right.
Which ended up being about 40 pages, but took me about 3 years.
In what style was that?
That was a very detailed, illustrative style, black and white. I don't know what I'd call it really, but just quite a lot of detail in it.
Right, okay. Bit similar to the work you're doing at the moment then?
No. Detailed in the way that I put in a lot of little fiddly lines. Right. Whereas what I do now is quite detailed, but it's more of a clear line style. Okay. What I was doing then was very sort of a lot of cross hatching and that kind of stippling and stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. But that did quite. And I printed 500 of those. It was black and white, and after about 2 or 3 years, they sold out. So yeah, excellent. Not bad for a small press.
No, comic. Definitely. Anything else following that you did?
Those are the 2 major things I did. I did a lot of small press stuff for other people, little anthologies, a few covers here and there. But really, the next thing after The Tempest was, I think I might have got into another band around that time. So there was big gaps between all this. But the next thing really was the Rainbow Orchid, which I actually started in 1997. But I only did 3 pages then. So I did that in my spare time over the next sort of, 10 years.
Okay. Well, at this point, can you give the listeners a brief overview of the Rainbow Orchid and the influences that you drew upon to create it?
Yeah. Well, after The Tempest, which obviously was an adaptation of someone else's work, I wanted to do something that was, purely my own creator-owned thing. And I wanted some characters that I could take and produce, various adventures for. So that was my starting point. Mm-hmm. And I'd been to the UK Comic Art Convention in the early 90s and shown, it was the first time I'd taken my portfolio, and I'd queued up with everyone to show, I think 2000 AD, I think it was David Bishop was the editor then. Yes. And Marvel and DC and all that. And I came away, although I'd got some positive feedback, I came away thinking I don't really want to do comic strips for all, other people. Yeah. Because I take so long to draw them. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be doing comics and putting all this effort into it, I'd like to enjoy it purely for my own, purely my own enjoyment, really. So I thought I'm going to do the kind of comic that I want to read. So I looked at all the stuff that I like, and that's kind of the stuff I really enjoy is the European adventure stories, Franco-Belgian stuff. So like Tintin, Blake and Mortimer, Asterix, all those albums.
Mm.
So I knew I wanted to do that. So I'm influenced by Hergé and S.P. Jacobs and Yves Chaland and all that sort of school of clear line art.
I think a lot of people, especially myself as well, when you see the covers of the Rainbow Orchid or see the website, you first think of Tintin.
Yes, yes.
But I know you've actually said that's not necessarily the core influence, because there's a whole world of European art out there, which you've drawn upon that isn't as famous as Tintin.
Yes, really. In the UK, it's only Tintin that's known, really. Blake and Mortimer's being published now at last. But, it's still a much stronger thing in mainland Europe. Especially in Holland, they still like their clear line artists.
Right.
And then the story was influenced by the kind of novels I like reading, which is classic adventure, so like Rider Haggard, Conan Doyle, and Jules Verne, that kind of really classic adventure. The Rainbow Orchid itself is set in the 1920s. It's a sort of, really, it's one of those classic adventure things that I just loved reading. So it's the Rainbow Orchid is this mythical orchid that the main character, Julius Chancellor, needs to find to bring back to win a competition. And really, that's it in a nutshell. They start in England, they travel to France, end up in India, and then go up the Indus Valley and into the Hindu Kush mountains and into sort of Lost Valley territory.
Okay. How did the story first see print then? You mentioned that you started writing this about over 10 years ago now. Yeah.
Well, I started in '97, and then it got left for a bit. And then Jason Cobley, who at the time, he's a comic writer, and at the time he was doing a comic magazine called BAM, which stood for Bulldog Adventure Monthly, I think, or magazine. Bulldog Adventure Magazine. Self-published thing where he published his stories on his character Bulldog and a few other, and he put the Rainbow Orchid in it as well. So first of all, it was serialized in there over a period of about 2 years. And when I had sort of 5 episodes, I self-published the first volume myself in black and white with a colour cover.
Okay.
That was about 2002 or 3, I think.
Why at that time, because you had previously self-published your own work, why at that time did you use somebody else's self-published magazine to feature your work in?
I can't really remember why I had made that decision. Jason had been talking about doing a comic for kids, maybe sort of 12 to 14-year-olds, because at that time everything was sort of for mature readers. It was, Vertigo, which was at its height, and it was all
Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. Yeah,
a bit later than that maybe, when they'd had their influence and everyone else was going into that dark, gritty stuff, and a lot of sort of eroticism and violence. And kids' comics seem to have been maybe not forgotten, but there didn't seem to be any around, certainly in this country. So there was an interest in doing that kind of thing. And right from the beginning of the Rainbow Orchid, I wanted to do something not necessarily aimed at kids, but okay for kids to read. So it didn't have those sort of more adult elements in.
The Rainbow Orchid is good because it's not just aimed at kids. It's sort of you can read it as an adult and enjoy it, and also children as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, really, I just did it for my own. The audience was me, and I think that's an important point. Is if you try, and certainly whenever I've tried to do something for a sort of perceived demographic, I tend to fail because you're trying to please too many different imagined audiences, and you end up not really directing it to any single one, which can water down your vision quite a lot. That's certainly what I felt. So there was this sort of idea for this kids paper, and I think that fell through, and then Jason returned to doing Bulldog. I think he may have asked me, or maybe I said, how about printing it, and I contributed to the cost, so it wasn't a money thing. It wasn't that I couldn't afford to self-publish anymore. I think it was just I think he had a better readership. That he'd been doing Bulldog since the 80s, so he built up a good readership, and I think being part of that was quite a good thing. So,
and were you getting feedback while you were publishing your episodes in his magazine? Were you getting good enough feedback that you decided to then self-publish a collected version?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Jason was getting letters, and I was seeing them in the letters columns, and obviously people were liking it. So I self-published the first 5 episodes. I took it to the London Comic Con at the end of, I can't remember if it was 2002 or 3, and I printed 100. No, I hadn't. I printed 300, but I took 100, and they all sold out in that day.
Right.
Which was a totally manic day, but very good.
So were you there the following day without any copies?
No, it was only a one-day event, actually.
Oh, right. Okay.
But it certainly gave me the confidence to think people like it.
Good stuff. And so you've been self-publishing, but how did your book deal come about then? Because now it's published by Egmont in the graphic novel format.
Yeah. Well, that was the self-published book was just the first. What is now Volume 1. So it's just the first volume, and I didn't want to really the Rainbow Orchid. I always saw as a single book. So it's being printed at the moment in 3 volumes, but really I didn't want it in 3 volumes. I wanted it as a single graphic novel.
Right.
So I decided not to self-publish a volume 2. I put it on the web, so it became a web comic. And that also enabled me to do it in full colour, of course, as well. And the great thing about the internet is you suddenly got a global audience. So my readership, you can see with your stats where they're coming from and the kind of numbers, and it was going up and up. And sort of word was spreading, so it was doing really well. So it was up as a webcomic for a couple of years, or a year and a half, and I had an email from Balance, the publisher, science fiction imprint of Orion, I think, and they showed an interest in it, and I thought, oh, that sounds a bit serious. So I went to a friend who's an agent who worked for AP Watt up in London, literary agents, just for some advice. And she actually ended up taking me on as a client,
right?
Which I didn't expect at all. But that was great. And from there, although she eventually left the agency, but I got picked up by another agent, and then so that's my current agent now, Ollie at Blake Friedman, and so he just put it out to about 10 publishers about 3 or 4 years ago, and that was it really. That it was about half of those showed a strong interest, and it was just
that's good.
The agent doing his thing and ended up at Egmont.
Excellent. If you were starting out today, because this has been a long work in progress, if you started out with the Rainbow Orchid today, do you think you'd just publish it via the web or keep in print?
I think I'd definitely start out on the web, purely because you can just start straight away. There's very little cost. You won't make any big publishing. If you make a mistake in printing, it's permanent and and you're stuck with it. But on the web, you can learn and you can build up an audience. So I'd definitely do it on the internet, and then I'd print and have that to take to comic events and things. But certainly the internet's a fantastic way to get your work out there.
Okay. What are the different ways in which you have marketed your work?
Well,
you've got the website, but
yeah.
what are the things you do behind the scenes to try and spread the word about the Rainbow Orchid?
Really, the best thing I've had is my website. And it's a difficult thing having a website, because the way you tell people about it is you go onto forums and things and you push it to people, but you can't really push it too hard because people react negatively if you're overdoing it. But as for other ways of marketing, I mean, the thing is now I've got, with Egmont, they've got a marketing division, which is very nice, and they're a bit of a mystery to me as to what exactly they do. I mean, I know some of the things they've done. They've printed leaflets, and they're talking to bookshops and distributors, which is an area. That's the one thing I kind of don't like about having a publisher, really, is that's out of my hands, and I'm relying on them to do their job on that, which I'm sure they are.
But they've managed to get your book into the likes of Waterstones, which is one of the larger book chains over here.
Yes, yeah, pretty much the only book chain. That's the problem. But not. I mean, there's 300 Waterstones in this country, and I'd be surprised if it's in more than 30 or 40 of them.
Right.
If that. So Waterstones is not easy, even for someone like Egmont, who I think they're the biggest children's publisher in this country. So even for them to get, it's really comics. Waterstones, as far as I understand it, aren't quite sure what to do with comics.
Yeah, they have their manga section.
Yes.
Mixed in with the sci-fi novels.
Yeah. Yeah, and graphic novels are, you kind of think of now as graphic novels as being perhaps that sort of Vertigo and also 2000 AD stuff, so maybe for the older reader. And you can simply put the Rainbow Orchid something like Tintin and Asterix, which are kept in the children's section, and that would be fine. But I did hear, certainly in the early days, they had a problem knowing that they didn't know whether to put it in the kids section or the graphic novel section, and I think it ended up going in neither for a while.
Oh, right.
But otherwise, the other marketing I do really is just getting out there and selling it at shows and things like that. Egmont put me up for various talks, so I've been to some really good literature festivals last year, like the Hay Festival and Bath, and the Edinburgh Festival. So talking about comics at those things has been something I couldn't have done if I was self-publishing, certainly.
So you sit in front of an audience and tell your story, do you, at these
it's
festivals?
been different at each one. So the Hay Festival, I had a slideshow, and I just went through how I make a comic, because the audience for that one was mostly kids.
Right.
So it was sort of how I make a comic, how I script it, and there's people who there's a whole load of people now who comics are new to them, because we don't really have kids comics for sale like we used to in the 70s and 80s. So it's a new thing to a lot of people, and they've no idea how they're made, and people find that fascinating, which I'm so amazed at. I think when you actually describe it, I think it's quite boring, really, but people are fascinated. They think computers draw it all now. You just press a button and it all gets drawn.
What tips do you have for those looking to market their work at shows? Because you mentioned going to comic conventions and the London Film and Comic Con. So you set out your stall, you sell your work. What kind of tips would you give to people looking to do that for the first time?
Well, I'm still fairly new at it myself. I mean, I used to do it in the sort of 80s when I was publishing fanzines, but really I've only been doing it on a more serious basis for the last year or so, really, a couple of years. So I'm not full of advice for anyone, but the things I'm learning are really, I wouldn't expect to go to your first show and sell out necessarily. So if your first one's a success, do go back, because people see you. They might ignore you the first time or sort of take note, but when they start seeing you at the next show and the next show, they'll think, oh, I've seen that before. I'll have a closer look at that. So to keep going, and also I think one thing I've seen other people do that's been very good is having sort of smaller, cheap things.
Right.
So like badges, postcards, and prints. And even if people don't read your comic, they'll buy. I mean, badges. People buy them. I think, why are they interested in badges when they haven't even read my comic? But they just collect them, you know. So that may be the first step in becoming familiar with your character or your comic.
And the badge is a nice bit of advertising as well.
Yes, of course, yeah. So they put it on their coats or bags or whatever. So it's difficult to get too much lettering on there. That's the problem, especially the little ones that people like. But it's a little reminder, you know, and they may see it again at some point and eventually buy the actual work. But the other thing I see people do, especially self-publishers, is if people don't buy stuff, they give it away for free, which is okay, I suppose. But I think if people buy things, they value it more. If you give it away for free, they tend not to value the stuff so much. And you do have to keep in mind, I mean, it's not being cutthroat or mercenary by any means, but you do have to keep in mind that you need to at least get some money back.
Yeah.
And
they're more likely to read your work if they've paid for it in the first place, I expect.
I think so, yeah. And they'll just value it more because they've paid for it. So, you know, you can keep things low cost if you want, but don't give away too much stuff. But the first time I went to the MCM, I was giving my book away. If a professional or a reviewer came along, I was just giving them away. And actually, for most of those, I didn't get any feedback. And I found it was just as well to perhaps give them a bit of a discount. So perhaps reviewers, I'd just say they'd pay cost, or if an influential professional came along and showed an interest, I'd take £1 off it for them or something. And they valued it a lot more. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. What tips would you give to people looking to pitch their work to publishers?
I think that's probably an area I wouldn't feel qualified to give any advice on, purely because
I suppose you had your webcomic, and then that attracted interest in the first place.
Yes, exactly. I think there's kind of traditional route people think of about getting into comics, which is if you're an artist, to take your portfolio along or send it to an editor, and they'll think, you know, oh, this person's really good, we'll hire them. But there's all kinds of other ways as well. So I'd say just do good work and get it out there. So if you can get it on the web and build up an audience that way, you can sort of prove yourself by having a readership, no matter how small. If people are enjoying your work, I think that's a really valuable thing to be able to show that.
I suppose it's there on the web, and you can actually just send the link to publishers and just say, here you go, here's my website.
Yeah.
And if it's well laid out and displays your work in its best light, that can be a good thing.
Certainly. And also I think people might be quite surprised that publishers do keep an eye on what's out there. I mean, you know, I got contacted by Galant's initially, but I also got contacted by Titan Books. They saw it. I got contacted by David Fickling Books, and I got involved in the DFC comics through that. And although Egmont eventually picked me up through my agent, they were already aware of the Rainbow Orchid, having seen it online. I think that's my agent said that one of the editors at Egmont said, "Oh, we've been waiting for this." So that just goes to show, I think, that having it up there and out there, and you may think it's not being noticed by publishers, but I think they do keep an eye on what's going on because they're interested.
Excellent. Okay, can you please give us an overview of a normal working day for you? Well, it's pretty dull, really. I'd get up and after a cup of tea and trying to answer a few emails,
which is one thing I'm discovering is really important not to let answering emails go more than, say, half an hour. And
right.
Because you can end up, before you know, it's lunchtime, you know. But yeah, so I dive into drawing as soon as possible. If I'm drawing, which is what I'm doing at the moment, I mean, it takes me about 12 hours to pencil a page. So that's a whole day of just doing that, really.
Right. So that's just the pencils?
Yes, yeah. On average, probably about 12 hours for penciling. It probably takes me another 4 to 6 hours to ink it. And then about the same again for colouring a page.
Right.
I did all my scripting for Volume 3 earlier last year.
So how long would it take to write a script for a whole volume?
Well, so volume's about 40 pages, and it's difficult to. I did all my scripting on the train on various journeys to and from London, or most of it anyway. While I was doing other work, so it's difficult to kind of squash it all together. But that probably took me about 3 months, say, scripted.
And are these, because these are just written for yourself, do you write the script in a traditional comics script format, or is it a special format that you've learned just for yourself?
If you saw the finished script, yeah, you although quite often the descriptions are fairly sparse because I know what I mean, but
yeah.
Probably someone else could take it and draw from it. Although I start out by doing it freehand, just writing it freehand, and also thumbnailing sketches at the same time, and then I type it up afterwards.
Okay. Are there any technical tools you use? Because you said you write your scripts freehand. You actually do use your pencils and so on.
Yeah, I've got a notebook for the freehand, and that's full of doodles and you know, all the writing. And then I for Volume 3, I started using a program called Scrivener to type up the script. And then penciling the actual art. Well, after I've done the script, type the script, I then do thumbnails, and then I do A4 roughs, which is something I do for my editor at Egmont, and they're so they can get started on the editing of the text.
Like a storyboard.
Yeah. And then I pencil just on A3 Bristol board, and then I ink it with a dip pen, scan it into the computer, and then colour it on the computer as well.
Excellent. And what programs do you use for colouring? Is that Photoshop?
Yeah, Photoshop, yeah.
Okay, great. To wrap things up, can you give us an insight into your plans for the future? You've got Volume 3 coming up soon?
Yes, so at the moment I'm just finishing Volume 3, which I'll hope I'll have that all done, dusted in a couple of months. And then the next thing I'm going to do, actually, because Volume 3 won't be coming out until September, I'll probably return to putting a new webcomic up. So it'll still be Julia's Chance Adventures. I'll start a new story online.
Yes. That'll be good. So this will be continuing adventures. Julia's Chancer is the main heading on all of these different. You're going to write a set of different adventures, just involving the same character.
Exactly. Yeah. And hopefully there'll be if Rainbow Orchid does well, there'll be more books.
Excellent.
The Rainbow Orchid 1, 2, and 3 are all being collected next year, so early in 2012, into a single volume. Great.
How well has it been selling so far?
Pretty good. I don't know the full sales figures, but I know. I keep an eye on Amazon, for instance.
Yes.
And it's in the charts quite regularly. Children's comics.
Great stuff.
Charts. And when I spoke to Egmont, they're very happy with the way it's doing. Comics aren't selling brilliantly in this country at the moment anyway, compared to, for instance, novel. I've got a friend who's a novelist.
Right.
And she's selling tens of thousands of books. A comic author, I think, can expect to sell thousands rather than tens of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's something like Watchmen, of course.
Yes. But then you're selling those as well via your store on your website?
Yes, yeah. So and to make that a bit different, I charge a little bit extra, and I do a little grayscale watercolor sketch in those as well.
Excellent. And definitely worth it, because I've got a couple.
Oh yes, that's lovely.
Right, thanks very much for your time today, Garen.
I
think that was a great call, and it had lots of helpful information for our listeners.
Great.
I'd say if you want a great example of professional-looking, create-your-own website, then check out the Rainbow Orchid site, and that's at www.rainboworchid.co.uk. Garen's got loads of different things on the site. It's even got a behind the scenes section, and Garen, you show how the comic was put together, and it's got various articles that way to help people who want to create their own comics. So I thoroughly recommend it. Thanks for your time again, Garen.
Oh, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Cheers. Take care.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye.